And so today, we invited one of the really better known and very busy spokespeople for that community, Rabbi Dovid Feldman from Neturei Karta, who drove down here from Muncie. He drove 5 hours, and he's going to drive back 5 hours after we're done. So please help me welcome Rabbi Dovid Feldman. I embarked on a journey to familiarize myself with the ultra-Orthodox community and their struggle against Zionism relatively late. It was a few years ago. I grew up in Jerusalem, as many of you know, just not far from the very neighborhood where this community exists in Jerusalem. And as a good Israeli boy, secular Israeli boy, we looked at them and we thought we were supposed to hate them because the way they look different, they speak different, and they burn the Israeli flag and they don't serve in the Israeli army. So of course, as good Israelis, we're supposed to hate them. And it wasn't until many, many years later, here in Washington, D.C. one year, that I saw Rabbi Feldman, Rabbi Weiss, many of the others, as many of you do, have as well. They came down to a protest, and I approached them and began a conversation. And then I decided to start working on a book, and I'm actually working on a book about this community and about why they reject Zionism. And I have to say, I have learned so much from Rabbi Feldman and some of the other rabbis, and they introduced me to communities in Jerusalem. And like I said, I lived very near them, but I never met them. So it was thanks to the community here in the US that I met them, and also the community in London. And it's just been an incredible journey to get to know them and to understand the struggle, understand why it is that they reject Zionism. I want to read a little passage from something that I just read, a wonderful book, a classic actually, called Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman. He's a Russian Jewish writer. And the setup for this little thing I'm going to read is a letter from a mother to a son. The mother's in a concentration camp. The setting is the World War II, and she's writing her very, very last letter to her son as she knows she's going to be killed. And after I read this, I'll tell you why this is so important. So this is a passage from this letter. She says, "This whole noisy world of bearded fathers and querulous grandmothers who bake honey cakes and goosenecks, this whole world of marriage customs, proverbial sayings, and Sabbaths will disappear forever under the earth. After the war, life will begin to stir again, but we won't be here. We will have vanished, just like the Aztecs once vanished." And she's talking about the very Jewish community. And one of the things that struck me most when I visited the community in Muncie and Williamsburg, and other places, is the children. These wonderful young children that you see running around, going to yeshiva, often on the buses, and they are learning and they are living just like these communities that everybody thought were going to disappear. And that reminded me of a famous saying by Bobby Sands, who was an IRA volunteer who died as a result of a hunger strike. He was one of 11 hunger strikers who were allowed to die by Margaret Thatcher of the UK. And one of his most famous sayings was, "Our revenge will be the laughter of our children." And when I saw those children, that is the answer. I thought that is the revenge against the Nazis. And when this community came to New York, and again, these are things that I learned from Rabbi Feldman and others in the community, they came with nothing. They're survivors. This entire community are descendants of survivors of the Holocaust. People who came from Hungary and from Poland, and they had nothing. And it was thanks to a very particular rabbi, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, who was known as the Satmar Rabbi, that this community was able to build itself, and today is such a large, prospering community, and prosperous community. So that's the background, and this is how I know Rabbi Feldman, and this is how this relationship began, and how I realized it is so incredibly important for people to understand what this community does and their fight and their struggle against Zionism. So thank you for being here. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for all the times that we sat and chatted. We've had some incredible, incredible conversations over the years. And maybe we can start with some very basic information. Why does the ultra-Orthodox community, why do you reject Zionism so fiercely? And why have they rejected Zionism from the very, very beginning? After all, Zionists call for a Jewish state. So why would the most observant Jews in the world reject that?
Good question. First of all, thank you so much, Miko, for inviting me. Thank you for the Palestine House of Freedom. And thank you for Janan. And thank you for the great work you're doing here. And it's a privilege for me to meet you again, but it's even a greater privilege to be part of this place. I was there before, and I hope to be back again. This work is so important because, especially here in the United States, we need more information. You know, it's unfair for the masses that simple information are taken from them. It's us as ordinary people or as activists that we need to help the people overcome this massive ignorance or propaganda. The answer to the question is quite simple. In our communities, it's quite simple. Before we talk about the past, let's talk about the present. Today, I always say you don't have to be Jewish to understand how wicked and how wrong Zionism is. You just see what's happening. You just follow alternative media. You just follow true information that comes that we see in front of our eyes, and you just have to be human to realize and understand that this is unacceptable. This is not only now, it's not only for the past 14 months since this genocide in Gaza is going on. This goes back already for decades, that these crimes didn't start now. This is just ongoing crimes, and it's not stopping. And it's basically getting worse. But getting back to your question, originally why the Jewish communities were opposed, it was way before anyone ever understood how criminal Zionism is. It's in those days when people really believed that this is a land without a people, for the people without the land. This is the most peaceful concept that can be. And we just simply, refugees from the Holocaust, just need a place where to go. And this is going to be so peaceful and so friendly and so beautiful. But even in those days, the religious Jewish community was in a very strong opposition to this whole concept, to this whole philosophy. This was coming from Europe, which was the main concentration, the main Jewish community at the time, and in Palestine, which there was existing a small Jewish community of tens of thousands of people, and they opposed it. They opposed it entirely. They believed that all of this, even if this is in peace, even if you don't harm anyone, this happens to be in total contrast of very basics of Judaism. According to Judaism, there's a concept of Jewish exile being a divine decree. This is not like an access. This is not because of the lack of physical power of the Jewish people. Again, this is the very basics of Jewish belief, that we believe that our exile is a divine decree that we are required to accept. We are forbidden to end by any physical means. We wait for a messianic redemption, which should happen by God himself without any human intervention. This is very basics that was believed by all Jews throughout all generations for the past 2,000 years without any exception. There was no disagreement. This is simple Judaism. Until Theodor Herzl came over 100 years ago. He and his friends, who didn't follow anything within Judaism, they were not only secular, they were basically hating God and hating the Jewish religion, the Jewish tradition, and they, and only they, came up with a philosophy which is so contrary to basics of Judaism. Then it took time till people started to realize how much more is involved, how much more violations of Judaism, how much more harm to Palestinians and to Jews is involved in all of this. And today it's much easier to accept, to follow, and to understand how true those people were, how right this claim was. This is not only a catastrophe for Palestine, this is a danger for the Jewish people. It's causing so much danger to the Jewish people, all these actions that are being done in our name, and ends up, after all, what we see, how the Zionism unfolded till today. It's a true uprooting of our religion intentionally, not accidentally. This is intentionally uprooting, destroying everything Jewish and replacing it with something artificial, replacing it with some nationalism which doesn't even make sense, which doesn't have any really future. And we consider this a true disaster from whichever way you look on it. Therefore, you find today so many Jewish people, not everyone speaks up in public, as everyone can imagine how terrible intimidation is, not only in Israel, but in the United States as well, and in many parts of the world. But still in all, we have people who do have the courage, and at least what we are doing in our organization, Neturei Karta, our mission is to raise the voice of those masses of people behind us and get the voice out to the public, onto the surface. People should know what is behind all what's happening. And let me just throw in this little story. I had a friend whom Miko maybe knew. He passed away in the COVID pandemic. He was involved in one of the major businesses in New York City. I'm not going to mention a name.
I know, yeah.
And he came over to me once and he said, I'll do everything I can to support you, but there's no way I can come out in person. I come out in person, they take a photo of me, I close down the business the same day. And he was right. I was just a couple of days ago in Toronto. Oh no, I'm sorry, Toronto was a week and a half ago. But there was a couple of days ago in Dallas, Texas. And there was a JNF global conference. And then they would try to do everything to make us uncomfortable. But the most successful thing they did is they had a gentleman coming over inside our crowd and just taking photos of people for an attempt to intimidate us. But we're used to all of this, and we are out there. People should take the pictures, and please use the pictures and publicize them. And this is what needs to be done, and this is important for humanity, and that's basically what it is.
Yeah. So it's interesting because as you were speaking, I was thinking of the exact same gentleman who passed away, sadly. And when I came up to Muncie the first time, you organized a little trip for me, and I was at his house, and he and I were speaking. And as we were sitting in the living room and talking, and then his wife came in, and she came and joined us and sat with us. And she was very firm. She looked at me and she said, "What is it with these Israelis? Why do they think they can treat the Arabs like this?" She was very firm. I was like, okay. So I said to her, what the Zionists did is, and you talk about this nationalism, they said, Jewish people are not a religion. Jews are not a religion. Jews are a nation, like in the modern sense of a nation, not in the Jewish interpretation of what it means to be the people of Israel. So Jews are a nation, and then they took the Bible and they secularized it. They said, this all God and the religion is nonsense. It's our history book. And then they took Palestine and they said, well, that's our homeland. And when I said the part about they secularized the Bible, she started to laugh. And she laughed and laughed and laughed. And she said, how do you secularize the Bible? What kind of a crazy thing is that? She thought it was so absolutely ridiculous to say something like this. But that's what the Zionists did. And then they moved forward with the story, and they were able to sell it. And so the movie we saw was a story of a Holocaust survivor who refuses to accept Zionism. The community here in Muncie, this very large community, are descendants of survivors. These are stories that you told me. And so not only are these Jewish people in opposition to Zionism, but these are Jewish people who experienced the genocide of the Jews in Europe, and they reject Zionism as well. So this is incredibly powerful and incredibly important. And some of you may know this. I'm sure you know this now. They're trying the Israeli government is trying to draft tens of thousands of young ultra-Orthodox Jews. I believe the number right now is something like, I heard 36,000 young men who are eligible for the draft. And they're refusing. And when the Zionists confront them, they say, Hamas is trying to kill you too, Hezbollah are trying to kill you too. They said, this was your idea. We didn't want a state. You wanted a state. This is your problem, not ours. So it's not, this is an ongoing theme, this deep understanding that there's a difference between the Jewish faith and its relation to the land of Israel, and the violence of Zionism and their relation to the land and sovereignty and so on. So now you mentioned how the Jews from the very, very beginning, the European Jews, were in opposition to Zionism, and you introduced me, I believe, to a book called Orlei Sharim.
Rabbi Hirsch.
Rabbi Hirsch did. You're right. That's right. It was Rabbi Hirsch. Actually, that's right. He gave me a copy when I was in Jerusalem. That's right. So can you talk about that?
Well, that's basically the opinion of those religious Jewish leaders, and they expressed their...
It's interesting that you remember that it was Rabbi Hirsch that gave it to me.
Well, but you told me.
I told you the story, yes, that's right.
That's basically documentation, that's letters of leading religious Jewish rabbis at the time that expressed their very strong opposition to the movement. And this was the very early...
This was 1900.
Right.
Zionism was barely on its feet.
And what's also very important to keep in mind when we're talking about the times in history, Zionism started way before the creation of the State of Israel. Now people think that everything started in 1948. And then part of the Zionist propaganda is that the Arabs hate us, and this is true anti-Semitism. This is a very good point that I'm sure we're going to discuss here. Arabs hate us, and because they hate us, we are in danger. And because we are in danger, we have to do something about it. Now the question is what we should do about it. That's a very good conversation. But this whole notion doesn't make any sense. And it's not true. Because we have to go back, not to prior to 1948. We have to go back to prior to the movement of Zionism coming in. We have to remember history that is on purpose being eradicated. It's being eradicated because it doesn't favor Zionist propaganda. Palestinian people never had a problem with Jews. On the contrary, they had the best relation with Jewish people. Jewish people happened to be at the time a very small minority. We're talking about the early 1900s, living amongst a vast majority of Muslims without any United Nations to protect them, without any Jewish military to protect them, and they were respected and protected. There was no problem. Nobody ever thought it's a problem. Happens to be there was a letter written by Rabbi Alter. Rabbi Alter was one of the Hasidic religious Jewish leaders before the Holocaust. And his community had some questions whether they should go, some of them should go live in Palestine. In those days, spiritual people or older people wanted to go to the Holy Land, which is holy to everyone. And they wanted to basically go to the Holy Land just to serve God, live in peace with everyone. And they were questioning whether it's safe. And Rabbi Alter visited Palestine, and he wrote a letter. I'm not sure which year it was, but maybe in the 1930s, something like that. And he wrote how excellent the peace is there, and how comfortable the Jewish people live there, and how nicely they're being treated. You have no problem. You can go there without any question, without any problem. What we are facing today, or what Jewish people already faced before 1948, yes, there was a Hebron massacre, which is always used in Zionist propaganda. In 1929, the Palestinian Muslims killed Jewish people, and this is used as a proof that they hate us even without the state of Israel. They hate us just because of classic anti-Semitism. And whoever is a little bit familiar with history, and we have documentation on this, there was a famous Rabbi Baruch Kaplan in New York. He was very famous. He studied as a teenager in Hebron before, during, and after that massacre in 1929. And he tells his story, how beautiful the peace was till the Zionists came in, antagonized the indigenous population, openly publicizing what their agenda is, and obviously it caused a reaction. Now, what I say always is, nobody enjoys reaction. Nobody wants to see reaction. None of us. But we have to understand when we are seeing something happening that this is a reaction, not because we want it, not because we justify it, not because we say any yes or no to it, but we have to know the facts. The fact is that something is happening which is unfortunately causing reactions, which is disastrous for everyone. And it's painful for everyone, especially now, October 7th. Now, I meet so many Israelis, so many pro-Zionists, especially in the last year. Please don't laugh. People truly believe, and they mean it, they truly believe what happened on October 7th is just because we were born Jewish, or just because we follow Judaism, and just because we refuse to give up our religion. And people believe it. And why do people believe it? Because the Palestine House of Freedom doesn't do enough. We don't do enough because people don't have the chance to learn better. And that's why all of us are out here, because we have to do more to help people. Simply, we have to help people overcome this. It's so painful, it's so disturbing when we see this misinformation leading into this massive destruction of humanity and uprooting of Judaism, and still people don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Americans receive a Zionist education, and so we're already at a disadvantage with that. So now we need to go and undo what's been done for so many years, and that's seriously a challenge.
But what we are trying to do in so many cases, when I come into the Palestine House of Freedom, it might be dangerous for the Jew, isn't it? But I can come in and hopefully I'll get out alive, and this is going to be a statement. This is. And I approached a Zionist just a week or two ago, and I asked him, "Did you ever speak to a Palestinian? Did you ever try to understand what they have to say? Let's say they're terrorists, let's say they're terrible people, but speak to them." And unfortunately, it's the propaganda is so terrible, it's so ridiculous. And when you're talking about this, the Holocaust coming into all of this, like this movie is really powerful, really sad, really encouraging. It's so much in it in this couple of minutes, but what we always say is, yes, it's our families, it's our communities that suffered in the Holocaust. And we remember the Holocaust. And we remember it for a purpose. Rabbi Teitelbaum, you mentioned before, in his massive book, which was maybe the first real powerful book against Zionism, which came out like maybe 40 years ago. And he writes in the introduction, and he brings from previous Jewish scholars, and he says, and he refers this to the destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago, which in Jewish custom we have every year on the day that the temple was destroyed, we mourn, we fast. And then he explains that mourning on something that happened is only worth something if you learn what the cause was, what's behind it. Otherwise, you just simply mourn and you simply complain. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help anyone. And the same is what happened in the Holocaust. The Holocaust should teach us something. It shouldn't teach us repeat what happened. It shouldn't teach us to do what others did to us. It's so ridiculous when we see that the Holocaust is being used to justify similar crimes to what the Nazis did. This is not a lesson that we as Jewish people should take from the Holocaust. This is not a lesson that anyone should take from. On the contrary, I say this in public. It's because it's my families, it's my communities that suffered the Holocaust. Therefore, we don't want to see this happen to anyone. This disturbs us more than it should disturb anyone else. And again, this is part of this, well, misinformation, lack of education, or lack of, well, common sense because of this massive propaganda. This massive propaganda is so powerful that manages to brainwash smart people. And not only smart people, but kind people. You can find people today that will be brilliant, and they will be kind. They would give charity. They would help everyone. And when it comes to Palestine, that's the end of the common sense. It's very disturbing. It's truly
the end of the common sense. It's true. It's a good way to put it. As you were talking about the Holocaust and the need to remember it, and it was your families and your. I remember you and I talked about this conference you went to in Iran. There was a conference in Iran several years ago. Questioning, I'm not sure what it was, questioning whether the Holocaust happened or discussing the Holocaust, and you went and were attacked. You and a delegation went, and can you talk about that, and then why did you decided to go, and what happened?
Yeah, this is very good because I have a good story that goes with it, and that's even better. There was the Iranian government at the time. This was. I'm not sure, I can't remember the year. What's okay?
But Ahmadinejad was the president, right?
Ahmadinejad was president.
Yeah.
And basically what he did is that while the Zionists were using the Holocaust as a tool to silence any conversation about Palestine. No, you just can't say anything about Israel because anti-Semitism and Holocaust and Jewish people were killed and we need a safe place, a safe haven and all of this. And Ahmadinejad was this, person that stood up and dared to put a question mark. Now, and what he said is, I don't know. I was not there. I didn't see it. I just see what people say. I see what propaganda says and what the media says. Let's discuss it. Let's research it. As every topic on academic level, we want to research. We want to see, and let's hear from the people. And they invited everyone who wanted to say something about the topic. Let's come. Let's sit down at a table. Let's see. Let's hear what the people say. Happens to be that they invited 2 or 3. I don't remember 2 or 3 Holocaust survivors, ex-American senators, and they accepted the invitation. They were about to go to present their side of the story, which is a very reasonable, very smart step to do. And then we were also invited, and our rabbis had what to say about what did happen in the Holocaust. It's our families, it's our communities. Rabbi Weiss has very close stories to tell. Rabbi Cohen from England lived in England during the Holocaust, and he had a lot to say. He knows numbers and a lot of information. And we accepted the invitation in order to present our information that we have about the Holocaust. And at the same time, we found it very important to put it in the right perspective, not to misuse the happenings, the tragedies that happened to our communities, and to put it in the right perspective, that whatever happened was bad, but we don't believe that this should be used to do crimes against others. That was basically our message. It came closer to the conference, and the Zionists realized that this is not going to be in their favor, and it started a massive propaganda campaign against this Holocaust denial conference. Now, this word denial was blatant propaganda. The name of the conference was to review the Holocaust. Those ex-American senators canceled, they changed the plan, they're not going to attend. We ended up attending. My colleague, Rabbi Weiss, stood up in the opening session after the foreign minister Motaki opened the conference by saying that regardless what is going to be the result of this research, what is being done to Palestine is wrong, and so on. Rabbi Weiss stood up and he spoke a couple of minutes explaining that it's his family that suffered in the Holocaust or killed in the Holocaust, but we don't believe that this gives any legitimacy to do this to others. Associated Press was there amongst many other not pro-Israeli media, but Zionist-controlled media, let's say. And I firmly believe that this was pre-planned. And in many cases, we know that wording is pre-planned. And as was before the Holocaust, it was like publicized that it's a Holocaust denial conference and all of this. Now, then the Associated Press made a video piece that went around viral to all the television stations. And they reported that this Holocaust conference, the Holocaust denial conference is taking place in Tehran. Rabbis from New York came and denied the Holocaust. Rabbi Weiss said that the Holocaust, the 6 million people that were killed, is an exaggeration. This is the first half of the story. Second half of the story is we have a friend, I'm not going to mention a name, a Swedish guy who worked in the United Nations for many years. He was a correspondent for 3 publications in 3 different countries in Europe for a long time. He ended up being a professor for journalism in MIT in Boston. And he told us a story after we returned from Tehran. And he said, I came into class and I asked my students, how do you know that when you watch CNN that what they say is true? Maybe it's wrong. And then they say that, we'll listen to CBS and we'll compare. But how do you know that CBS is correct? Maybe it's also wrong. Okay, then they say we'll watch Fox News and we'll compare all 3. But how do you know? Maybe all 3 are wrong. And then everybody laughs. Okay, then he plays on the wall that piece of the television. I mean, maybe it was Fox at the time. And you remember this? Rabbis went to Tehran denying the Holocaust. Yes, everybody knows about it. And then on the other wall he shows this text from our website, exactly the wording, what Rabbi Weiss said. And let's compare the 2. And everybody was like shocked. And this was a lesson. And then he told me what triggered him to look into this. Like he could have believed, as everybody believes, what the media is telling the story. Then he said, I had 2 questions which didn't make sense to me. First of all, I know these rabbis personally, and it simply doesn't make sense that these people should deny the Holocaust. I know them personally. And then he had a question, and you have to be a professor in journalism to realize this. He was listening to an American news outlet. And the English-speaking reporter reports what's happening there. And then, in a foreign country with a foreign language, an American person stands up to speak in English. And then naturally, the reporter should allow us to listen to the speaker who speaks in English. This is not a foreign language. The reporter doesn't have to translate. But no, in this case, the reporter was telling what the rabbi is saying, while you were seeing the rabbi speaking with that silver microphone in his hand. The reporter was explaining that this rabbi is denying the Holocaust.
In English.
The reporter was speaking in English, and then
the rabbi was speaking in English.
Yeah, right. And this didn't make sense to him. And this is what caused them to look into it and to figure out and to find out that all of this is propaganda. This is just a very good example to understand in which world we are living, in which information we are being fed. And it sounds like a conspiracy, but unfortunately we cannot trust everyone. We have to know if we are making serious decisions. If we're just watching news and just having fun, okay, that might be, it's also not fine. But if we are making serious decisions, we have to have honest and reliable information.
Yeah. And by the way, I also spoke to Rabbi Cohen about that conference as well.
And by the way,
yeah,
intimidation was unbelievable. I'm not sure whether you're aware.
No, I'm not.
The intimidation is still going on till today. People remember it. The intimidation was unbelievable. And it's important to know this. Why? Because when sometimes you see the Jewish person and you see a person going with a yarmulke, with a head covering, or you see somebody visibly Jewish, and and sometimes people get very upset. How come these people support these crimes and all of this? I was asked a couple of months ago, how come there's not more Jews with you to come out in public? And I answered, and the people understood this. I answered, never ask a question why people don't do. You always ask a question, how come that people have the courage to stand up? And I'm sure that everybody in the room today here knows exactly what I'm talking about, because you just walk out of this building and you can face intimidation just for listening. Not only for saying something, not only for doing something, just for listening. And again, there's so many people in our communities, as that story I mentioned before, are so intimidated. I always say people are more afraid than what's really happening, but we cannot judge. We cannot judge the people. I always say to people, if you're afraid, not necessarily do something, but at least don't support the evil. Don't support the evil, and let's try to do the best we can. But at least it's important to understand, and it's not only the Jewish community, it's in the Palestinian community the same. We have so many Palestinian people, not only pro-Palestinian people, not only Arabs, but Palestinian people who find themselves so intimidated, so scared, especially the immigrants. And believe me, they have why to be scared. Because so many people who are permanent, who are citizens, not only permanent residents, who are citizens, that immigrated from Palestine have challenges if they do too much. That's how it is.
Yeah. So we know that the Zionists or whoever it was came up with a new definition of anti-Semitism. I'm not sure what was wrong with the old definition, but there's a new one now, and it's been accepted by every organization, governments, non-governmental organizations, universities, churches, and on and on and on and on and on. Can you talk about this, why there is a need for a new definition, and does it protect Jews more somehow? Does it help Jews somehow?
Well, whether it helps Jews or not, we'll come to that in a minute. But why? It's very simple why. Because there is a national movement of Zionism, there's a state of Israel, which needs to do everything they can to justify everything they do, or at least silence any opposition to them. That's the reason. Now, whether this is in favor of the Jewish people, or you can ask whether this is justified, whether this is right. This is very important to understand. Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism in any way. This is the most ridiculous, ignorant statement that you can say, that stopping a Jewish person that crossed the red light and caused and did a dangerous step or caused an accident, and punishing that person, to call this anti-Semitism doesn't make any sense at all. And not only does it make any sense, but if you say so, you are causing so much danger and so much harm. But to begin with, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism because Zionism is not Judaism. It has no connection. And we have to understand this. Judaism is a religion only. The Jewish people are the people following this religion. Judaism has nothing more than the belief in God and the practice of His commandments. This is what Judaism was for thousands of years, for 3,000 years. This whole new approach to Judaism, without judging any individual who might not follow Judaism for one reason or another, that's not our business at all. But what Judaism was for thousands of years is what I said. There was no question about this, there was no doubt or no disagreement. Now, the movement of Zionism came, transforming Judaism from a religion into a national movement. But you cannot call it Judaism. You can call it XYZ, you can call it the Zionist state, you can call it the movement of Zionism, okay. I wouldn't be happy when you call it any other name because it's still wrong. But at least you don't hijack an identity of a people. And at least you're not distorting a thousands of year old religion. Now again, Zionism is not Judaism, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Masses of Jewish people disagree with Zionism. Now, would you say that all those people are anti-Semitic because they disagree? Doesn't make any sense. Then nobody will blame me to be anti-Semitic. They will say I'm a self-hating Jew. I'm a self-hating Jew because of what? I'm not sure exactly. I say I'm a proud Jew, bringing proud to the Jewish people and to the Jewish religion. And if anybody does otherwise, then I say that those people are betraying their people and their religion. And let's not forget, we're talking about people, again, without judging the individual. We're talking about people that go in total contrast to what their ancestors believed in. It's not a disagreement between my ancestors and their ancestors. It's something that was agreed amongst all Jews. Now, in Jewish scripture, there's a saying, whoever changes needs to prove the point. Whoever continues don't have to prove. I don't have to prove when I'm right, when I'm continuing a continuation of thousands of years. If you come up with something new, then you have to prove your point. And again, when you're asking the question whether this new definition of anti-Semitism is in favor or does any good for the Jewish people, not at all. We have to remember that the state of Israel and its actions, all crimes it commits to Palestine is not only criminal, not only dangerous, not only a catastrophe for Palestine, it's a danger for the Jewish people. When all of this is being done supposedly in the name of all Jews, and Netanyahu does everything he can to make sure that people believe that he represents all Jews. Now this is the greatest danger for the Jewish people that can be done. And conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, conflating Judaism with Zionism, makes a statement. This is done on purpose. This makes a statement as if all Jews, God forbid, support the state of Israel and support all these crimes, which ends up making a statement, guess what? That all Jews are accountable to what's happening. Now, where can you find a greater exacerbation of anti-Semitism than this? Now, what's happening is they are coming with a new definition of anti-Semitism in order to fight anti-Semitism, in order to bring safety and security, supposedly, to the Jewish people. And by doing so, they're not only committing crimes against others, but actually causing anti-Semitism. I have a friend of mine who receives letters, like fundraising letters from the ADL. And years ago, he showed me a letter, and he tells me every year is the same language. We need to raise money to fight anti-Semitism because anti-Semitism is on the rise. Now the question he asks is, How come? You are fighting anti-Semitism. It shouldn't be on the rise. Now the answer is very simple. Because they do everything they can to rise anti-Semitism. Now the question is why? Why would a person do that? Why would a Jewish person cause anti-Semitism? It's a very good question. Now one answer, which is quite a good answer, but not the best answer, would be they have no choice. Yeah, they want to have the state. And if they want to have the state, they're not willing to give it up. And they have the enemy, the created enemy, not the natural enemy. Now, we agree that we had anti-Semitism for the longest time. But when we find today people in Gaza hating Zionists, or maybe hating some of them might hate Jews, this is not ancient anti-Semitism. This is created anti-Semitism. This is created hate towards the Jewish people. But since they're not willing to give it up, they have no choice, and they have to fight and fight again and shed more blood and supposedly bring safety to the Jewish people, and by every step they take, they just make the situation worse. It's quite a good answer, but this is not the best answer. The other answer is what Theodor Herzl wrote in his diary, that anti-Semitism would be our friend. They very desperately need anti-Semitism in order to be able to justify their existence. Because if there is no anti-Semitism, there is no need for the state of Israel. If Jewish people lived in peace in Palestine, then what's the excuse? What's wrong? Now let me tell you this. When I traveled to Gaza, we traveled to Gaza twice since the beginning of the siege. And we came back with stories. Not only the sad part of Gaza at the time then, in 2009, it was terrible. It was terrible. This was about 17 years ago. It was terrible at the time. But in addition to those stories, we brought back some enlightening stories. I brought stories to my community, what my experience was with meeting the most oppressed people from this occupation, and no one would say to us even one bad word. This is a lesson. This shows something. This shows that we are so close to peace. And we're talking about even the people in Gaza. If we find Palestinian people in the United States who are very polite and very nicely and would receive Jews who don't fight, that's also very nice, very encouraging. But we're talking about the people who are the most affected from this occupation. Now, these stories are the most disturbing for the Zionists, because this basically undermines the whole excuse for having a state. Again, the new definition of anti-Semitism is as in favor of the Jewish people as the occupation of Palestine is. It's a disaster for Palestine and a disaster for the Jewish people.
So, two stories that I want to bring up here that are connected to this. So there was a famous rabbi in Jerusalem called Amram Blau. And I remember the name Amram Blau growing up as some kind of a horrible, scary figure that wants to destroy Israel. And again, I think it was Rabbi Hirsch that gave you a book about the teachings of Amram Blau. And it's in Hebrew, and a young student is asking him a question and is interviewing him. And at one point he says to Rabbi Amram, he says, what would you do if you were in charge? If you were the boss, if you were in charge, what would be the first thing you do? And he says to this young man, the first thing I would do is I would ask the Arabs to come back. And this young man asked him, what are you talking about? They want to throw us into the sea, they want to kill us all. He says, who told you this nonsense? Where did you hear this nonsense? He says, his family, part of his family was in Hebron. And he says, we were neighbors. We took care of each other's children. We were close together. We had good relations with each other. And in Jerusalem, we always had good relations until the Zionists came and created this, this reality now where we have violence and so on. So that's one aspect of this thing I wanted to talk about, this notion again that you mentioned, that somehow there's something inherently violent between these two people, where actually there isn't, because these were Palestinian Jews, just like these were Palestinian Muslims. And then the feeling of, I mean, would you really blame people for hating the people that are coming to kill them, especially when the people that are coming to kill identify themselves as Jews, as representing Jews? And then earlier in my office, you showed me a letter that also speaks to something very similar and speaks to your point about the state of Israel harming or being, basically harming Jews and the increase in the rise in anti-Semitism. Do you want to talk about that? Do you want to read some of it? Or?
This is not the first time we get a letter like this, where people, sometimes Palestinians, in this case it's an Iranian woman, who tells a story how she grew up in a stroller at pro-Palestinian demonstrations. And she had every hatred.
In Iran.
In Iran. Every hatred towards the Jewish people just because what they're doing, the Jewish people. Until she came to Canada, and she's from Canada now, and she got some Jewish friends and still didn't trust them until she learned our organization, people who come out in public, and what she said, what she writes in the subject of the email, you are killing hate. And this is exactly what we are, what our intention is. We want to kill hate. We want to undermine hate. We want to teach people that we don't have hate and we shouldn't have hate. And when those other people with political agendas use all of us for their political gains, and we end up, all of us, end up suffering. And this is ridiculous. It's so easy. It's so, as I said, the stories I brought from Gaza. I truly believe that we are very close to peace. We just hope, and we need to do everything we can to stop the obstacle to peace. But we as peoples, Jews, Muslims, we have to use past history to teach us how beautifully we can live in the future. But we have to put these politics aside. We have to put this rebellion against God aside. According to Judaism, rebelling against God is not only a transgression of the Jewish religion. There is a verse that says, why are you violating the word of God? It will not be successful. We can only bad can come out of this blatant rebellion against God. We have to turn back to God. We have to turn back to justice, to humanity. And again, we can live in peace. Even if we wouldn't have the past history to teach us, we should understand this with our simple common sense and wisdom, that we should build peace by ending violence. But it happens to be that we have an example of history to teach us.
I know I'm going to open up for questions just a second. So there's this claim that I hear very often that Neturei Karta is a small group of radicals that does not represent anyone and is completely insignificant. Can you talk a little bit about Neturei Karta, first of all, what it is, and then this notion that somehow it's just a group of fanatics that doesn't represent anything or anybody?
If you're talking about Neturei Karta and radicalism, you mentioned Rabbi Amram Blau. Rabbi Amram Blau was the leader of Neturei Karta in Jerusalem. And what your perception was, that scary person. Many people have this impression. You know, some people, and you knew Rabbi Beck.
Yes.
Yeah, some people have this perception of Rabbi Beck, you know, the crazy, wild person. And you knew him personally, yes? We're talking about the most kind, soft people that you can imagine, right? Now, Rabbi Amram Blau, let me tell you this story. Rabbi Amram Blau was this type of kind person that it's very difficult to find. There was a person in Jerusalem who he was homeless, he didn't have a shelter, and he was ill. He had a contagious illness, and nobody wanted to take him in. And Rabbi Blau took him into his home and helped him until the day he passed away. This is just an example what Rabbi Blau was. And Rabbi Beck was the same. And I still remember, I don't remember Rabbi Blau, but I do remember Rabbi Beck. I was a child, and I still remember, the kindness he did, exceptional kindness that maybe Palestinian people will know these stories, but in America you don't even see it,
Right.
Generally speaking. Again, coming back to the question what Neturei Karta is. Neturei Karta is basically people, vocal people, many parts of the world, who basically take for a mitzvah, for a commandment, to raise the voice of the masses, raise the tradition of Judaism up to the surface. People should know and people should be aware. This is basically what we are doing. We are voicing the traditional voice of Judaism. Whether we are radical, you say if speaking up for peace is a radical approach. You say if condemning crimes is radical. Now, whether this is a fringe minority and all of this, yes, being vocal in face of massive intimidation ends up to be a smaller number, yes. But this doesn't change the fact that what the voice we are bringing is the voice of truth, is the voice of Judaism, and is the voice of masses of Jewish people today. You are a bit more familiar. Go to Jerusalem. You would find hundreds of thousands of people. And let's put it this way, without taking exaggerations, at least no Israeli flag. Okay, we can go on further with Palestinian flags displayed on the walls, but even if we take it a step back, no Israeli flag. You come to Brooklyn, New York, tens of thousands of people, dozens of massive religious institutions, educational institutions, with no mention of Israel, no Israeli flag, no prayers for Israel, no celebration of Israeli Independence Day. This tells you something. Now, whether all of these people will raise a Palestinian flag in public, no, because they'll be considered Hamas. Now, I encourage the people they should do it. But again, as I said before, I'm not judging the individuals. I'm definitely not judging people who are connected or have to be connected to some other peoples. If individual people, it's much easier to stand up. If you have people leading communities, it's much more difficult. Again, I don't judge the individual. I encourage each and every one to overcome the fear, overcome the propaganda, and do. If you're going to pay a price, it's not going to be that terrible price. You're going to remain alive, believe me. And you're going to be the servant of Almighty God and doing good for humanity, including good for the Jewish people. This is what we try to educate, and people get it, and people start to understand. And sadly, it's very sad that since October 7th we have much more people understanding, and I always say it's so sad that we have to pay this tremendous price for people to wake up. And finally we see in America this uprise of people that are waking up, unfortunately because of the seriousness of the situation. And we hope it's going to go the better.
Can you talk about the name Neturei Karta?
The name Neturei Karta is Aramaic, which is the guardians of the city, referring to the city of Jerusalem. Now, this name was given by the public in Jerusalem to the activists who stood up in opposition to the Zionist movement in its very beginning when it came into Jerusalem, came into Palestine. Why? Because these people were viewed as the protectors of the city. The small Jewish community at the time were really scared and afraid of this danger of Zionism, how it's going to destroy everyone. And they considered these activists as the protectors of the city. Exactly where this phrase comes from, it's a Talmudic story where it was Rabbi, can't remember who it was, that came to visit a town. And he asked the people that they should bring to him the protectors of the city. And they went and brought to him the soldiers. And he said, no, these are not the protectors of the city. I want to see the protectors of the city. And they didn't understand. And they asked him, well, who exactly do you want to see? And he said, the scholars, the religious people, the people who would, with their good deeds, protect the city. And this is like a famous story being used already for a very long time.
Yeah. Thank you for that. That's exactly the story I wanted you to tell. So, so if anybody has any questions for Rabbi Feldman, please. Please.
Actually, I'd like to share a story.
Sure.
Okay,
Do we need a mic or is it?
can you hear me?
We're good. Yeah, well, they can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Okay, great.
Just raise your voice a little bit.
Okay. My mom came to this country in 1948 after the Holocaust. And she was from a small city that at the time was in Czechoslovakia called Mukachevo. Okay. See, all right, you would recognize.
Sure.
Okay, and she told me this story. You know, we look at this movement as somewhat of a fringe element, but she was telling me it was not, just as you said. It was the common movement. And in Mukachevo, there were two famous rabbis, Hasidic rabbis, that were anti-Zionists. I mean, this was the way it was before World War II.
Rabbi Shapiro, the rabbi of Munkach, was one of the most strongest opponent to Zionism before the Holocaust, and he's well known.
Have you successfully changed someone's perspective or rhetoric, especially in the past year with the Zionists that you said you've had discussions with? And do you have like a story, or how did you change your perspective?
In the last year, I only would remember stories that we managed to confuse people, which I consider an achievement. Definitely, we had many people. We had many people in history in the last decades who listened to our voice, read our literature, and opened their mind. My colleague allowed me to say in public that he originally served in the Israeli army, and proudly he joins us here today. These people were exposed to some information they didn't know before, and they learned. But when I say confusing those Zionists, you have to know exactly which buttons to press. You have to refer to their problem. They're worried about the Jewish people, they're worried about anti-Semitism, and they're worried about Hamas killing the Jews. And I always try to tell them, who hates us, why do they hate us, what's going on, why are we in danger? And sometimes they come to a point where they get confused. Now, I'm not saying that everybody changes their mind, but at least once in their lifetime, they'll be exposed to something that nobody will tell them.
I think just the sight of a rabbi like yourself with a scarf for that says Free Palestine is enough of a shock, is already a shock for a lot of people.
No, but what happens is that the Zionist propaganda makes, as you mentioned before, this radicalism and these crazy people, they do everything they can to dismiss the credit of these people, of our people, which unfortunately works. But again, this is not in favor of the Jewish people. And
there's another thing that's confusing, and that is when you see this new version of Zionist Orthodox Jews, like West Bank settlers, and they dress and look very much like the Orthodox Jews, and that becomes very confusing as well.
But when you're talking about radicalism and fringe, the settler movement is a radical fringe society, which is unaccepted by the vast majority of even Israelis. Maybe Netanyahu will accept them, but because he's that fringe radical person. But generally speaking, the settler movement is like that way extreme unacceptable movement. And it happens to be, you know, Rabbi Weiss, one of my colleagues, always says that the settler movement is even more embarrassing to us because, as you said, they look religious, and it seems like if the religion drives them to what they're doing. But if you very closely see what's going on, these are people, generally speaking, people who are very poorly educated in Judaism. They might come from non-religious families coming back to Jewish religion, thinking and believing that they're doing the greatest favor for God by fighting for this state of Israel. And they are so committed, they have this religious devotion of doing God's will in a such distorted way, which is, it's so painful, it's so disturbing. Again, when crimes are taking place, it's terrible. But when you're misusing religion to justify it or to encourage it, it's so much worse and ridiculous.
Yeah, please.
Thank you for being here. I will ask kind of from the other side. Sometimes you get in conversation with people who are supportive of Palestine, and they know about you or your group or similar groups, and they say, you know, these people are, they're not in it because of their like humanity, or you know, they believe this because of their own religious beliefs, and it's for their own purposes. Sometimes you hear this from pro-Palestine people or even from pro-Israel people, and it's another way to try to
Dismiss our work, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm used to all of this. This is a purely Zionist propaganda. Unfortunately, this reaches some pro-Palestinian people also, and this is intentionally done. This is fine. This is terrible. Don't you judge what my intention for what I'm doing is. Just ask me. The same as I said before. Approach the Palestinian people, hear what they have to say. Whoever listens carefully to what we say knows exactly what we're doing, what our purpose is, what our goals are. We are an open book. Just listen to what we say. That's simply. Yes, we are religious people, and our approach is rooted in our religion. Our humanity is rooted in our religion. Our justice is rooted in our religion. Our opposition to crimes and to injustice is rooted in our religion. There certainly it is. Maybe some people who are not religious to a certain extent are uncomfortable with it. Again, I'm not judging an individual, but listen. You just have to listen to what we say. But it's a very good point. I appreciate you brought it up.
Yeah, thank you. That's why I wanted to.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for being here as well. I have just a comment, just thinking about something that you said. I live in the Dominican Republic. I'm married to a Palestinian from Haifa. And I arrived last night and I read about you being here, and so it was very
Thanks for
blessed
coming.
to make it. But I just wanted to make a comment. You were saying about Palestinians who are kind, who are very generous, and how they have a hard time even accepting what is happening. And I have a good friend who is Palestinian, originally in the Dominican Republic. Probably the nicest person I've ever met in my life. The best mom, the best wife, just the best friend. And talking to her about what's going on, she's of Palestinian origin, and what she said to me that was really just so shocking was, yeah, but they've been killing each other for thousands of years. And so I took a deep breath, and I think I managed to, saying if you've been able to change someone's mind, I think I did manage to change her mind and explain to her that, no, that's really not what's happening. But it's so ingrained in so many good people who really believe that this is something that they put their hands up and say, we just have to go on with our beautiful life because there's nothing we can do because they have been killing each other for thousands of years. And I remember when I first met my husband, his father was still alive at the time, and he would talk about how him growing up, his best friends were Jewish, the early 20s and 30s. And it's just, it's hard not to get frustrated when that is such a narrative, not only of Palestinians in the Dominican Republic, but I have friends in Argentina that say the same thing, in Chile, the same thing. And I feel like I'm, just navigating against the current, trying to convince people that this has not been going on for thousands of years, and it has nothing to do with religion. So it's.
I definitely agree, but unfortunately, this is how the propaganda is successful. We can blame the Zionist movement everything, but we cannot blame them of their sufficiency. Unfortunately, it's the power of Satan that helps them. There's no excuse, but unfortunately, they are successful in manipulating the minds of so many people to blindly support Israel. Blind, to politicians, individuals. It's very disturbing. And again, it's very disturbing because it does so much harm. But as a Jewish person, I say it's so disturbing because it's destroying the Jewish people as well.
Do you have a question back there? Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of times that we're so close to peace. And I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around all the hate that's out there, especially when we see what's happening in Israel with the hate for Palestinians. And I'm trying to understand why you truly believe we're so close to peace. I mean, in my mind, I feel like the only way that we can move forward is if Israel starts to disintegrate from within. And I'm just curious about, where you think this is going, and what percentage, possibly based on people who know in Israel, are really starting to change their perspective, or how big a movement it is within the Zionist entity where to bring about change.
I'll clarify what I said when I believe that we are very close to peace. And I think I said this before. I believe that we are very close to peace if we are willing to stop the obstacle to peace. Now, when what you're mentioning, that we have hate on all sides, right? Now, this hatred, again, coming back to that point that Zionism needs anti-Semitism, this hatred on both sides just... The Zionist movement give that excuse that you just mentioned, that we have hate and there is no way out of it. And you know what? Rabbi Teitelbaum, coming back to Rabbi Teitelbaum you mentioned, he writes in his book, in his second book that he wrote after 1967. And he writes twice in his book a shocking statement that people didn't accept when he wrote. Many people didn't accept. He writes like this, and I think that was either referring to 1960, the Suez Canal War. Anyway, what he says is, Ili hoya mevatrim. When the Zionists would have been willing to give up their desire for nationalism, the way he puts it is that the United Nations will be able to work out a beautiful peace. At that time, not everybody accepted what he said. But since then, we saw already an example in South Africa. South Africa was the same. Hatred was so bad, and the whites would say that there's no way we can give it up because we'll all be killed the same day. And this was like the excuse that they have to continue in order to survive until pressure was strong enough and they had to stop. And suddenly, I visited South Africa a number of times. I met some old African people, and they said, listen, all what happened to our families, people disappeared, people were killed. All we wanted is a better future, stop the oppression, and reveal to us the information. where our dead are buried. We want to have the information. We want to turn the page. We want to start a new history. This should be a lesson to prove that Rabbi Teitelbaum was right and to show us how the future can look like. But, as you said, there's a condition that the people in power need to wake up and to realize that for the sake of everyone, we have to stop the obstacle to peace, and we have to stop it in its entirety. We cannot we'll make a two-state solution, we'll oppress some people, we'll give back the rights to some people, and I'm not sure exactly which rights we're going to give back to those some people, which doesn't make sense, it's not going to work, and But Netanyahu has to be willing to give up their very beautiful, artificial dream and give it up for the sake of Almighty God, give it up for the sake of humanity, give it up for the sake of your people.
There's a banner that you always carry I've seen several times, where it says, we call it for the peaceful dismantling. The peaceful dismantling of the Zionist states. That's what that's the obstacle.
We pray for that, and we hope God, because we believe it can happen.
Yeah.
It can happen peaceful, but God forbid it shouldn't cost more lives, because we have lost enough lives on all sides, enough catastrophe, enough bloodshed, enough suffering of everyone.
And that's the mission of this place here, to dismantle apartheid and establish a free, democratic Palestine from the river to the sea. That's what we're all here for. Anybody, anything else? Please? Sure? Yeah.
I'd like to respond to a comment you made, Rabbi, in that when you were asked what... And one of those objectives was to cause confusion. Okay, I have to tell you, mission accomplished. Okay, on a personal basis, because I had been an anti-Zionist since my late teens. Came to Washington, D.C. about a year and a half ago and but felt alone in that. I mean, I didn't know very many. Came to Washington, D.C. about a year and a half ago, went to a march and saw you folks for the first time. And I flipped out. I mean, I had never seen anything like this in my life. And so, of course, I came to know of your movement and where you stood. And actually, it ended up giving me great comfort, because I could see that, a very religious community believed in this as well. It wasn't just a fringe element like me.
I'm happy. Thank you.
If anything else? So I'll wrap it up. I just want to tell one story about, there's an interview with son of Rabbi Beck, Rabbi Beck from London, and he's being interviewed, and he was asked the question, so what's wrong with Zionism? How is it in opposition to Judaism? The journalist into the synagogue to the Ten Commandments, and he says, you see this? Do not steal. You see this? Do not kill. He says, this is it. I mean, obviously all of Zionism is killing and stealing. So it was very, very simple. So, like I said, I'm working on a book. Actually, I've got some of it already written about this wonderful community and the connections that I've had and the stories. You've seen some of the stories. Some of them are about Rabbi Feldman. The title I chose for it is the quote from Bobby Sands that I mentioned earlier, the laughter of their children, because that image of the children in the community, particularly when I was up there in Muncie during that visit, is just so uplifting. It is just so beautiful, and that is, if there's any revenge for what happened to these communities in Europe, the laughter of these wonderful children is it, and this this community existing and prospering is it. So thank you again so much for coming down. It's been a real pleasure talking to you again. I'm sorry, you have a question? Please, yeah.
I forget his name. He carries around a book.
Rabbi Weiss.
Okay, yes. Is there anywhere that has links or anywhere you could see what is in that book?
I'll give you my card and we'll be able to show you.
They have a website.
That's great.
There's a website.
I've gone to the website. I don't
And they have a website.
There's a new website.
Okay.
It's redone.
And there's also they have a presence on Twitter. media in English, in Spanish, in Arabic, in Turkish. Right. So the, huh?
No, not Torah Judaism is an anonymous person. We don't know who it is. He reposts many of our stuff and some others of it. He does a great work, but I have no idea who it is.
So what is the I forget.
Well, Neturei Karta International is the Facebook. Yeah, on our website you'll see it. nkusa.org. You'll see all the links.
nkusa.org, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you'll see if you go on Twitter. If you follow me on Twitter, then you can find because I repost a lot of their stuff, and so. Okay, well, thank you all, and once again, thank you, Rabbi Feldman. It's a real pleasure.
I thank you, Miko. Thank you so much for inviting us. If anybody would like to invite us to any venue, if it's helpful for some, if we can be of a help for any community, we love to come. We enjoy to find people that appreciate getting knowledge that sometimes is difficult to get.